Hello, welcome. Welcome again to another stream. My name is Isaac Anzu, and I'll be your host this evening as we tear down the walls of the establishment and destroy that which exploits the common man. Yes, hi, I'm Isaac Anzu. I'm here. I'm a chimera from the monster world, and we're going to talk about one of my favorite composers tonight. But yeah, tonight's theme is anti-establishmentarianism. Not anti-disestablishmentarianism, which is so disestablishment is the effort to separate church and state. So establishmentarianism is the effort to combine church and state. Disestablishmentarianism is the effort to separate that, and anti-disestablishmentarianism, which is the longest non-contrived, non-technical word in the English language, is a opposition to the movement to promote the separation of church and state. We're not about that. We are about anti-establishmentarianism here tonight. Yes, that's right. Down with the system. You can't trust the system. I'm an adult. That's such a good song. That is I Threw It on the Ground by the Lonely Island. An excellent song by an excellent group on an excellent album. Check it out. But yeah, so the establishment. So there's a very interesting study that happened. Oh gosh, I'm quoting studies and I don't have the study in front of me. That's no good. But the thing is, let me see if we can find this real quick while I talk about it. They in post-Napoleonic France, they were divvying up the land, and they found that the is this it? Did I find it? Maybe I found it. Okay, talk. Anyway, so basically they were dividing up the land in France, and after Napoleon, and so they had strategic villages, like next to important rivers or roads, and they had non-strategic villages, and Napoleon was like, seize the strategic villages, and so they did, and they brought in a bunch of new ideas that overthrew the traditions that had been established in these villages for a long time. So it's an excellent time period to study established traditions versus, dictated or revolutionary, or you could even call it like, institutional, or not institutional like an establishment, like the traditions, but institutional in the sense of like, experimental changes. And they found that a lot of the villages that had all their traditions heaved up and shipped out and replaced with the new, like, Napoleonic standards, fared better than the villages that kept to the old ways. And I think that's a interesting study, because you could say, well, yeah, of course, using money and merchants instead of bartering is an objectively better system, right? You don't have to work out how many cows is worth how many ears of corn. You can just trade money. You can set the value of things, which is cool. On the other hand, these changes brought a lot of turmoil into these communities, right? So there's there's a big debate on the value of traditions versus the value of revolutionary, progressive, engineered ideas, right? And a big push for tradition is that it works because it has worked and it's been working, right? The system works. It may not be the most efficient system in the world. It may not be the, most, profitable or ethical system, but it works, right? And meanwhile, on the progressive side, they say, well, we want to try new ideas. We want to break up the system. We want to flip everything on its head and see what works, right? And from inside the village, it's hard to accept that your life is going to change. But as the study in France showed, it could be changing for the better, very much better. So my point is, I think that traditions, and this is such a political thing already, traditions and cultural values have their place, and it's important to respect them and understand why they are taking place. So if something has, been built up by society and lasted quite a long time, it has some value to those people. And not just in the sense of we've always done it this way, in a sense of maybe this style of farming is best for this land, right? Maybe we value certain beliefs or certain, principles, and our society works well with those. But a traditional system, not a traditional value, but a traditional system, is not necessarily better than a progressive, experimental, revolutionary system. And we're going to talk about a time period in Russian history when nationalism was super big and the system, the tradition, was all over the place. And this is the guy, he was revolutionary. He was exposed to all sorts of music around the world and forged a style that stuck true to the values of his community while changing everything about the music that he created and expressing ideas and values about himself, if you can tell by the thumbnail, such as his sexuality, that oh my God. So Tchaikovsky, Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky, such a badass. Let's get into it. I'm ready. I've pumped myself up so much. All right, Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky. Yeah. Born May 7th. That was yesterday. I got close. 1840, and died November 6th, 1893. So this is the late 19th century Russian. A Russian composer of the Romantic period. So he is after Beethoven and well after Mozart. If you watched previous streams, I talked about them. We're doing composers. I love composers. They're awesome. It's the only part of history, not just music history, but any history. It's the only part of history I care about. I never could get into history classes in high school. It was just like, yes, there was this war, and then there was this war, and then there was this war. And I was like, okay, I get it. I understand. War sucks. Everybody dies. Blah, blah, blah. But then, in college, they started talking about music history. And music history is more about, composers and, integrating themselves in the culture and fighting the system and expressing their personal lives through their music. And yeah, it's fascinating. I love it. All right. Let's see. In 1884, he was honored by Tsar Alexander III and awarded a lifetime pension, which I guess he got 9 years out of it. Pretty nice. He was the first Russian composer whose music would make a lasting impression internationally. That's right. So we're also going to talk about the five. Yeah, the five. So these guys were pre Tchaikovsky. Mily Balkirev, Cesar Cui, Modest Mussorgsky, who you might know from pictures at an exhibition, very famous piece of music. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, whom you definitely know from Flight of the Bumblebee, and Alexander Borodin, who's also very good, but not as famous. Yeah, they came together and they were basically like the nationalist composers, right? So although musically precocious, Tchaikovsky was educated for a career as a civil servant. There was scant opportunity for a musical career in Russia at the time and no system of public music education. When the opportunity for such an education arose, he entered the nascent St. Petersburg Conservatory, which he graduated from in 1865. Let's just do some quick math here. So he was 25 when he graduated. So he started late compared to what we would normally consider conservatory college age for humans. The formal Western-oriented teaching that he received there set him apart from composers of the contemporary nationalist movement embodied by the Russian composers of The Five, with whom his professional relationship was mixed. There's an entire article about Tchaikovsky and The Five. Yeah, so they kind of circled around each other, and it was The Five that kind of became the symbol of Russian music, Russian nationalist music, music for Russia, music with Russian values and Russian traditions. And Tchaikovsky became the kind of counterpart to them. So here's a good section. Tchaikovsky's private concerns about the Five. Let's read this. The Five was among the myriad of subjects Tchaikovsky discussed with his benefactress, Nadezhda von Meck. In January 1878, when he wrote to Mrs. von Meck about its members, he had drifted far from their musical world and ideals. In addition, the Five's finest days had long passed, and he was just getting started. Yes. Oh boy, they were not doing well. Let's see. Cui had become better known as a critic than a composer. Balkarev had withdrawn completely from music. Mussorgsky was sinking ever deeper into alcoholism. That's very sad. And Borodin's creative abilities increasingly took a backseat to his official duties as a professor of chemistry. Ugh. See, this is the problem. You work for the state, and you're only as useful as you're only used as much as you're useful. I'm a firm believer that art has ebbs and flows. Creative work has ebbs and flows, and you can't just oh, hello boss, here's my music for today. You can, but it takes a lot out of you. You have to find another way to balance. If it's not with your creative time, what ends up happening with a lot of those composers who, oh, here's your music, boss, every day, is they do a lot of music they don't care about, and then they occasionally do music they do care about. So there's still a creative ebb and flow. It's just they have enough of a consistent work ethic during the ebb that they can keep working, right? Probably good for, you know, musician looking for patron work, but yeah. Only Rimsky-Korsakov actively pursued a full-time music career, and he was under fire from his fellow nationalists for much the same reason as Tchaikovsky had been. Like Tchaikovsky, Rimsky-Korsakov had found that for his own artistic growth to continue unabated, he had to study and master Western classical forms and techniques. Borodin called it apostasy, adding, "Many are grieved at present by the fact that Korsakov has turned back and has thrown himself into the study of musical antiquity. I do not bemoan it, it is understandable." Meanwhile, Mussorgsky was harsher. Ooh, here's a Russian swear word. "The mighty Kukha has degenerated into soulless traders." Or does this mean 5? I don't know. Can we Google that? Is this going to bring up Russian bad words? Yes, it's the 5. Yep, the mighty little heap. It's a little heap of composers. The mighty Kukha has degenerated into soulless traitors. So yeah, Korsakov is actually a pretty cool guy. He actually wrote a very, very good piece about Sinbad. And he, like Tchaikovsky, found that he couldn't grow without moving to Western forms and techniques, but Tchaikovsky was already there. He had started doing it from the beginning because he knew that he was not going to fit in with the nationalist composition style of the classic Russia. Tchaikovsky's training set him on a path to reconcile what he had learned with the native musical practices to which he had been exposed from childhood. Set him on a path to reconcile what he had learned with the native musical practices to which he was exposed from childhood. What a weird sentence. From that reconciliation, he forged a personal but unmistakably Russian style. Yes, so he was exposed to Russian music as a child and used Western techniques to forge his own style, holding the values of the culture while still pushing forward with the technology and the techniques. He was doing it big. Principles that governed melody, harmony, and other fundamentals of Russian music ran completely counter to those that governed Western European music, which seemed to defeat the potential for using Russian music in large-scale Western composition or for forming a composite style, and it caused personal antipathies that dented Tchaikovsky's self-confidence. He was a sad boy. You're going to learn this. Tchaikovsky was a sad boy. Russian culture exhibited a split personality, with its native and adoptive elements having drifted apart increasingly since the time of Peter the Great, who was a couple centuries earlier. That resulted in uncertainty among the intelligentsia, which is the upper class, about the country's national identity, an ambiguity mirrored in Tchaikovsky's career. So not only was he pushing back against nationalist thought, he was part of a movement that was questioning Russia's national identity. So cool. But you know, not every story has a happy ending. Because, you know, after, in the early 1900s, Lenin and Stalin came and said, nope, this is Russia now. And the Russian revolutions had happened, and it was wild. Okay. Despite his many popular successes, Tchaikovsky's life was punctuated by personal crises and depression. Contributory factors include his early separation from his mother for boarding school, followed by his mother's early death, the death of his close friend and colleague, Nikolai Rubinstein, who I believe there's a piano company named after him, and the collapse of the one enduring relationship of his adult life, his 13-year association with the wealthy widow Nadezhda von Meck, who was his patron, even though they actually never met each other. Interesting. I didn't know that. His homosexuality, which he kept private, has traditionally been considered a major factor, though some musicologists now downplay its importance. Now, I would disagree with this just because of, modern takes on, homosexuality and sexuality in general in oppressive societies. But who knows? We'll have to look more into who they're citing on this to get a better picture. Tchaikovsky's sudden death at the age of only 53 is generally associated with cholera, but there is an ongoing debate as to whether cholera was indeed the cause of his death. Yes, he may have caused that himself. While his music has remained popular among audiences, critical opinions were initially mixed. Some Russians did not feel it was sufficiently representative of native musical values and expressed suspicion that Europeans accepted the music for its Western elements. In an apparent reinforcement of the latter claim, some Europeans lauded Tchaikovsky for offering music more substantive than base exoticism and said that he transcended stereotypes of Russian classical music. Others dismissed Tchaikovsky's music as lacking in elated thought, boo, and derived its formal workings as deficient because they did not stringently follow Western principles, boo. Traditions, no. Mixing, changing, defying the system, yes. Tchaikovsky, good. Anyway, so he goes through a lot of shit in his life, and we're not going to do too much. You see, here's his relationship with the five. But let's talk about his personal life, because I think this is where we start to understand how revolutionary he was. Discussion of Tchaikovsky's personal life, especially his sexuality, has been perhaps the most extensive of any composer in the 19th century, and certainly any Russian composer of the time. It has also caused considerable confusion, from Soviet efforts to expunge all references to same-sex attraction and portray him as heterosexual, to efforts at analysis by Western biographers. So not only was he fighting against a system that was opposing him, they were also, kind of like straight washing him at the time. And this actually is super, super interesting, because we're going to talk about his sixth and last symphony. Excited. And you should be too. Biographers have generally agreed that Tchaikovsky was homosexual. He sought the company of other men in his circle for extended periods, associating openly and establishing professional connections with them. His first love was reportedly Sergei Kiryev, a younger fellow student at the Imperial School of Jurisprudence. According to Modest Mussorgsky, this was Modest Tchaikovsky, not Mussorgsky. This was Peter Ilyik's strongest, longest, and purest love. The degree to which the composer might have felt comfortable with his sexual desires has, however, remained open to debate. It is still unknown whether Tchaikovsky, according to musicologist and biographer David Brown, felt tainted within himself, defiled by something which he finally realized he could never escape, or whether, according to Alexander Poznansky, he experienced no unbearable guilt over his sexual desires and eventually came to see his sexual peculiarities as insurmountable and even natural part of his personality without experiencing any serious psychological damage. I would feel more inclined to agree with the biographer David Brown in this one. I obviously haven't done the research, but in my opinion, which is worth so much. Relevant portions of his brother Modest's autobiography, where he tells of the composer's same-sex attraction, have been published, as have letters previously suppressed by Soviet censors, in which Tchaikovsky openly writes of it. Such censorship has persisted in the Russian government, resulting in many officials denying his homosexuality outright. Passages in Tchaikovsky's letters which reveal his homosexual desires have been censored in Russia. In one such passage, he said of a homosexual acquaintance, Petashenka used to drop by with the criminal intention of observing the cadet corps, which is right opposite our windows, but I've been trying to discourage these compromising visits, and with some success. In another one he wrote, after our walk, I offered him some money, which was refused. He does it for the love of art and adores men with beards. And Tchaikovsky had a beard. Oh, it's all coming together now. Oh yeah, it's all coming together. Tchaikovsky lived as a bachelor most of his life. In 1868, he met Belgian soprano Desiree Ardo. They became infatuated with each other and were engaged to be married. So, bisexual, Tchaikovsky bisexual. But due to Arto's refusal to give up the stage or settle in Russia, the relationship ended. Tchaikovsky later claimed she was the only woman he ever loved. Bisexual. Yeah. Hundreds of men and one woman, as valid as 50-50%. It's okay. Bye, boys. Gotta represent. In 1877, at the age of 37, he wed a former student, Antonio Milikova. The marriage was a disaster, mismatched psychologically and sexually. The couple lived together for only 2.5 months. Oh, geez. Before Tchaikovsky left, overwrought emotionally and suffering from acute writer's block. Tchaikovsky's family remained supportive of him during this crisis and throughout his life. That's so awesome. Tchaikovsky's marital debacle may have forced him to face the full truth about his sexuality. He never blamed Antonia for the failure of their marriage. He was also aided by Nadezhda von Meck, the widow of a railway magnate, who had begun contact with him not long before the marriage. As well as an important friend and emotional support, she became his patroness for the next 13 years, which allowed him to focus exclusively on composition. While Tchaikovsky called her his best friend, they agreed to never meet under any circumstances. Wild. The mysterious widow, patron. 13 years of, paying a composer. That's so cool. Where's my mysterious, rich, eccentric that pays me to do creative things? I guess I need to, write some of them. So we're going to talk about, there's a lot of stuff going on here. But we're going to talk about the Sixth Symphony. They do have, come on. Symphony number 6 in B minor. Yeah. Symphony number 6 in B minor. So this is the end of Tchaikovsky's life. So he was, he died in 1893. And this was finished in 1893. Literally his last big work. The Symphony number 6 in B minor, Opus 74, also known as the Pathétique Symphony, is Peter Ilyich Tchaikovsky's final completed symphony, written between February and the end of August 1893. The composer entitled the work the Passionate Symphony, employing a Russian word, pathétiskia, meaning passionate or emotional, which was then mistranslated into French as pathétique, meaning solemn or emotive. It's the Passionate Symphony. The composer led the first performance in St. Petersburg on October 28th of that year, 9 days before his death. The second performance, conducted by Edward Napravnik, took place 21 days later at a memorial concert on November 18th. It included some minor corrections that Tchaikovsky had made after the premiere and was thus the first performance of the work in the exact form in which it is known today. So the final version was performed posthumously. It was the last of Tchaikovsky's compositions premiered in his lifetime. His last composition of all, the single movement third piano concerto, Opus 75, which was completed in October 1893, a short time before his death, received a posthumous premiere. So if you don't know opus numbers, this is, I'm sure you guys have heard of like Mr. Holland's opus or a magnum opus. Generally, they are set after a composer's death to catalog the composer's works. Sometimes composers will mark their own numbers, but a lot of times composers go back and update or rewrite works. So it's usually not until the composer is dead that they're set in stone. They're always chronological, and certain composers have their own unique opus numbers. So like Beethoven just uses opus, Tchaikovsky uses opus, but Johann Sebastian Bach uses the BWV number, Bachwerk Verzeichnis, and Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart uses the K number, Kochel Verzeichnis, named after the guy who cataloged it, Ludwig von Kochel, or Kechel. I'm learning German. I should know how to pronounce these things. Anyway, the Sixth Symphony. Oh, I wish I could play it, but I don't know. It might not be. Well, I mean, it's definitely public domain, but some of these recordings are still copywritten. Yes. So, the background. After completing his Fifth Symphony in 1888, Tchaikovsky did not start thinking about his next symphony until April 1891 on his way to the United States. The first new drafts of a new symphony were started in the spring of 1891. However, some or all of the symphony was not pleasing to Tchaikovsky, who tore up the manuscript in one of his frequent moods of depression and doubt over his alleged inability to create. He's a sad boy. Tchaikovsky's so sad. In 1892, Tchaikovsky wrote the following to his nephew, Vladimir Bob Davidov. The symphony is only a work written by dint of sheer will on the part of the composer. It contains nothing that is interesting or sympathetic. It should be cast aside and forgotten. This determination on my part is admirable and irrevocable. So he doesn't like symphonies. But there was an expectation to write symphonies among Western music. We talked a little bit in a previous stream about Beethoven writing his big 9 symphonies, and then Brahms and Berlioz writing their own symphonies and trying to emulate Beethoven. Tchaikovsky, who was trying to merge the Russian classical style with the Western classical style, created symphonies, and he liked them well enough, but he was a sad boy sometimes. He went through down periods, and so he didn't like the symphony in 1891. But in 1893, Tchaikovsky mentions an entirely new symphonic work in a letter to his brother. So I am now wholly occupied by the new work, and it is hard for me to tear myself away from it. I believe it comes into being as the best of my works. I must finish it as soon as possible, for I have to wind up a lot of affairs and must soon go to London. I told you that I had completed a symphony which suddenly displeased me, and I tore it up. Now I have composed a new symphony which I will certainly not tear up. Yes, Yes. The symphony was written in a small house in Kiln and completed by August 1893. Tchaikovsky left Kiln on October 19th for the first performance in St. Petersburg, arriving in excellent spirits. However, the composer began to feel apprehension over his symphony when, at rehearsals, the orchestra players did not exhibit any great admiration for his new work. He's such a soft boy. Nevertheless, the premiere was met with great appreciation. Tchaikovsky's brother Modest wrote, "There was applause and the composer was recalled, but with more enthusiasm than on previous occasions. There was not the mighty, overpowering impression made by the work when it was conducted later by Edward Napravnik on November 18th, and later wherever it was played." So it was an earlier version, but interestingly, it didn't have the weight that his death would give it. But there's more to it than that. Although it is not called for in the score, a bass clarinet is commonly employed to replace the solo bassoon for the four notes immediately preceding the allegro viva section of the first movement. This substitution is because it is nearly impossible in practice for a bassoonist to execute the passage at the indicated dynamic of sextuple piano. That's a very, 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 very soft. And yeah, it's impossible. I have played the bassoon, and it is impossible to do that, especially in the low register. Yes. Okay. So we're getting into the themes of the music, and I'm going to kind of deviate from this here into some of my own interpretations and opinions on this piece. But let's read the interpretation. Tchaikovsky critic Richard Tarskin writes, let's not talk about the S word. Let's say death theories were much stimulated by the Sixth Symphony, which was first performed under the composer's baton only 9 days before his demise, with its lugubrious finale. Lugubrious, meaning slow, ending morendo, dying away. Its brief but conspicuous allusion to the Orthodox Requiem liturgy in its first movement. So, literally, a requiem, a piece of music to commemorate the dead. And above all, its easily misread subtitle. When the symphony was done again a couple of weeks later in memoriam and with subtitle in place, everyone listened hard for portents. And that is how the symphony became a transient death note. Well, I just realized, death note, funny. Depression was the first diagnosis. Homosexual tragedy came later. And this is what I wanted to talk to it. Critic David Brown describes the idea of the Sixth Symphony as some sort of death note as patent nonsense. Yes. Says critic Alexander Przansky, since the arrival of the Court of Honor theory in the West, performances of Tchaikovsky's Last Symphony are almost invariably accompanied by annotations treating it as a testimony of homosexual martyrdom. Other scholars, including Michael Paul Smith, believe that with or without the supposed Court of Honor sentence, there's no way that Tchaikovsky could have known that the time of his own death while composing his last masterpiece. Okay. So essentially, this gets a little bit more into the themes of the piece, which are laid out up here. Oh, there's a MIDI file. Oh, neat. So essentially what the piece does is, it's like it says in the first movement, it has allusions to religious music. And what we end up getting is this, strong theme, in the low instruments, bassoons, violas, the first theme of the allegro. This is not the first theme, but essentially you have this like strong theme, this masculine theme, And it's accompanied by allusions to this religious music. But then we have this lyrical, or you could call feminine, secondary theme. And they start to weave together. This is a great sentence here, so I'm just going to read it. After you establish the first two themes, you start the development section in a sonata form, which this movement is. The energetic development section begins abruptly with an outburst from the orchestra. It runs seamlessly into the fortissimo recapitulation, whose atmosphere is completely different from its rather hesitant equivalent at the beginning of the exposition. The Tchaikovsky soon goes into something more nightmarish, which culminates in a refrain supported by brass and timpani. The movement concludes shortly after the recapitulation of the second subject shown above, this time in the tonic major with a coda, which is also B minor, finally ending very quietly. So one way to interpret this is that he has this strong, deep masculine theme and this lyrical feminine secondary theme, and they're accompanied by religious music. Sounds like they're getting together, they're getting married, right? However, in the development section, they just go wild, and the hesitation just becomes chaos and outburst and nightmarish, culminating in refrains of brass and timpani. And then when the themes return, the masculine theme is unchanged, but the lyrical second theme is changed. It's no longer in a minor key, it's in the major key. So something has changed with the feminine theme, and it's not hard to imagine that perhaps the gender of the theme has changed from something clearly feminine and female to something maybe still a bit feminine, but major, happier, manlier. Then we have the waltz, which is a very classic second movement, and the allegro, which is a very classic third movement. And this is pretty much Tchaikovsky building on these themes, expanding them, playing the sort of things that audiences would come to expect from a Western style piece, a Western style symphony, but he's doing it in his very quintessential Russian influenced Western style. So in this context, the first movement can also be seen as a metaphor between this traditional low Russian foundation and this more lyrical melodic Western idea, and that in itself is extremely interesting, because if you're thinking to yourself that Tchaikovsky is the manly theme, and then maybe his failed marriage is the first lyrical theme, chaos, 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 and now the lyrical theme is now more masculine, right? This implies that if the lyrical theme is more Western, then the lyrical theme is Tchaikovsky, and his understanding of his sexuality and his place in Russian and Western music clashes with the traditional foundation of the low minor Russian, da 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 da, whatever. We're not Rasputin. That came later in Russian history. And there's a clash, and what comes out is a happier, still feminine, still lyrical, still Western Tchaikovsky. He comes to accept himself So interesting. But then we get to the last movement. So the last movement is interesting because the symphony is all in B minor. But what you often see in symphonies is the key kind of changes as you go along, the different movements. And so, for example, if you know key signatures here, this one is, I believe that's G major. Yep, G major. Very good. But so I also want to point out, even in the waltz, the dance movement, the allegro, there is a bright opening that contrasts with a darker B section. So again, he's playing with this idea of light and dark opposites, and quiet ending. A graceful coda leads to a quiet ending. What's the ending? What's this idea of clash, recontextualization, and a quiet ending? So let's look at the third movement a little bit for a second. It's fast. It's in triplet time. So it's in G major and E major. It's very bright. And it's the only movement that ends triumphantly. Which is interesting, considering we've had two quiet movements, and the fourth movement is notoriously ending quietly, as we saw earlier. Why is the third movement so strong and bright? Well, I think the answer is in the fourth movement. Fourth movement, finale, Adagio Lamentoso. Back in B minor, the finale is a slow movement. Beginning with the opening A theme, the melody in first and second violins appears frequently throughout the movement. The theme is a composite melody. Neither the first nor second violins play the theme that is heard. So super, super cool musical technique here. So if you notice, these are the first two violins. One of the notes is higher than the other one, but they exchange which note is higher. So only by playing together do they actually create the melody of the piece, which is a very cool way to again reiterate this idea of two disparate ideas coming together. This piece could essentially be a biography for Tchaikovsky, in that he is bringing together two different musical styles and combining them into one new thing that can only be heard through both of these lenses. We go to a calmer D major segment, which again contrasts to the B minor. And then similarly to the previous section, the turbulent climax lies here. We get the timpani again. We get hyperactive restatement of the opening composite melody over a bass pedal. So bass pedal is very strong and foundational, masculine. But after this turbulent climax, we drop down to a somber funeral-like chorale. Funeral-like. You can see why people thought that this was like a death note of Tchaikovsky's. Very interesting. The following coda, based on the second subject, is mournful because we've gone back to B minor. The melody is then repeated with lower notes on the cellos, basses and bassoon, and finally ending quietly again in B minor in total tragedy, as if a fade out occurred. Among Tchaikovsky's symphonies, this is the only one that ends in a minor key. His first, second, fourth, fifth symphonies, plus the Manfred Symphony, are all minor key symphonies that end in the tonic major, which is a very common thing to do in Western music, particularly Beethoven's symphonies. The Fifth Symphony is famous for starting in C minor, ending in C major. So we get this idea again of ending quietly, ending somberly. And I think the reason that the third movement is triumphant is because in Western music at the time, there was a lot of emphasis of connection between the movements. And so I think what Tchaikovsky was trying to do here was build this, again, big, chaotic, fast, exciting moment and then bring it down to nothing. He was just doing it over two movements instead of one movement like in the first two. And that's another very good compositional technique. You know, repeat something, repeat it again but slightly differently, and then repeat it, but it's 2 times as long, and you get that kind of same thing in like humor, rule of 3, right? Very, very similar. So we get to, again, why does this all end so quietly? And I think that the idea that he was trying to pose is that he is of two parts. He is masculine and feminine. He is Russian and Western. He is strong and lyrical. He is fast and slow. He's trying to bring these two ideas together over and over again. But unless he's doing something like, you know, big and traditional and bombastic, it's silenced. It's pushed down. It's killed. And he has a funeral-like chorale and a tragic ending as kind of a funeral for these ideas. And I have to put this in context too. Russian orchestras, it has been claimed by Fritz Spiegel that Russian orchestras faced with the problem of an enormously popular but profoundly pessimistic piece switched the order of the last 2 movements in order to bring the work to a triumphant conclusion in lines with the principles of socialist realism. And that's a little bit later, but in Russian history. But we have to look at the time period that this was composed. So I'm looking for just Russia, right? Russian composer. Russian composers? This is going to be putting me on a list, but Russian history. So we're looking at the Russian Empire. Russian society in the second half of the 19th century. So this, in the 1860s, a movement known as nihilism was developed in Russia. Nihilists favored the destruction of human institutions and laws based on the assumption that such institutions and laws are artificial and corrupt. So this is kind of part of the movement that Tchaikovsky was feeding into. Nihilists thought the world lacked comprehensive meaning, objective truth, or value, questioned all old values, and shocked the Russian establishment. But the Russian establishment of this time period was extremely anti-homosexual. And Tchaikovsky, in his like literally last months of his life, writes this piece where he basically stands on stage and says, I am a bridge between Western and Russian society. I am a man who has loved men and women. We can be more than one thing. There's no true one right way. There's no one true right way. But I have been silenced. Every time I try to speak up about this, they silence me. They kill my ideas. And he put this out and then died, supposedly from cholera, but possibly by his own hand, 9 days later. Wild. And this is all of his life living under opposition to his identity, to his sexuality, to his identity as a composer. Every single part of him. Very, very cool anti-establishment. I wish I had more time because I want to get into the Russian nihilist movement. It's pretty much exactly what he was all about. Like this idea that the establishment, the established pre-existing ideas, had no more meaning than anything else. Russian nihilism did not target all ethics, knowledge, and human life as meaningless, but instead focused on what it saw as meaningless in the dominant hegemony of religion, morality, philosophy, aesthetics, and social institutions. Yes. The Five versus Tchaikovsky, nihilism versus the intelligentsia. Everything. Russian music versus Western music. Tchaikovsky was this centerpiece to the idea that something can be valuable globally. It doesn't have to be Russian to be valuable. It doesn't have to be Western to be valuable. It can be both, because neither idea is inherently more valuable than doing what you want to do, doing what you want to, like exploring what you want to explore, saying what you want to say, being who you want to be. So yes, this has been, by Reddit's political compass memes standards, the lib left stream. Woo! Actually, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to go into this too much, but politically I consider myself pretty moderate. There are places and there are times and places for every sort of political theory. You just have to apply them in the right ways. But I have such deep admiration for a guy who lived his life, under a regime that could have easily just taken him out, killed him, be done, no more Tchaikovsky. And yet he found a way to blend these cultural ideas and bring Russian music to the West and bring Western music to Russia and become internationally acclaimed and write amazing music. And yeah, at the end of his life, he basically wrote a big symphony that said, I did my best, but the fight's not over. I did my best, but they still silenced me, you know, and then he died. At 53, he could have done so much more. It's possible that he died from cholera. It's possible that he died on his own. It's certainly also possible that quote unquote cholera was something else, perpetuated by someone who didn't like him. He certainly had people like that. But yeah, I have a great admiration for a man who stands up for himself and his ideas and tries to bring the world together, closer, to understand it. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do here, right? I'm trying to understand humans. I'm trying to bring the world closer to me. I feel that being on the other side, being in the monster world, everything felt so far away. And I know that I haven't gotten many viewers and even fewer comments. I'm just trying my best here. I want to bring the world here. I want to bring it closer. I want to find the place where I can, you know, improve my life and the lives of other people. You know, I want to contribute to the cultural legacy. It's too late on a Saturday for these kind of talks. We're gonna have to say goodbye now before I get sad. My name's Isaac Anzu. This has been a very wonderful stream, and I will see you. Actually, I'll see you pretty soon because holy heck, I have a run tomorrow morning, so I'll see you soon. Bye.